I was standing on the porch of the cabin I'd built with my own damn hands over the last 10 years, every beam placed, every nail hammered by me. 10 years of weekend drives, sweat, busted knuckles, and the occasional argument with a tree stump. I'm Elijah Marden, cop for 22 years, and this cabin was my escape plan for when I retired in 4. But on that quiet Tuesday morning, I found a group of strangers in neon vests marching across my gravel driveway like they owned the place. At the front of the pack was a woman in a pastel pink pantsuit with a clipboard bigger than her ego. I'd met her once before at a community meeting. Glenda Taro, president of the Whispering Pines HOA and self-declared queen of the county. She was flanked by 2 guys with measuring tapes and one poor intern who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Excuse me," she called out with that high-pitched chirp people use when they're trying to sound polite but are actually furious. "You're trespassing on HOA property." I raised an eyebrow. "I live here," she sniffed. "This land was annexed into Whispering Pines jurisdiction last fall. The vote passed and your cabin violates multiple aesthetic and zoning codes." "You didn't attend the meetings." "Because I'm not part of your HOA," I shot back, stepping down the porch stairs. She held out a folder. "You might want to read the paperwork. As of last month, this area is under HOA control. Your structure doesn't meet community standards and we've voted to have it removed." I opened the folder. It was filled with maps, fake meeting minutes, and a letter with my name misspelled stating I'd been notified. I hadn't, not once. "You forged this," I said flatly. Glenda tilted her head. "Excuse me, I'm a detective. I've testified in fraud cases for 15 years. This letter has a fake signature and a non-existent notary seal. You didn't notify anyone. This is a land grab." She blinked, then narrowed her eyes. "You can call it what you want, but the backhoe arrives at noon. Your cabin is coming down." I don't know what made me angrier, the arrogance or the fact that she thought I'd just roll over and let her bulldoze a decade of my life. I took a photo of the documents she handed me, then walked back inside and locked the door. They stood there, mouths flapping, while I pulled out my own folder, one that held the original land deed, permits, and the county's official zoning maps. I'd kept every receipt, every notice, every signature. Because when you've spent 10 years building a dream, you don't leave anything to chance. I made 2 calls, one to the county clerk's office and one to my buddy Nalan, who worked in zoning enforcement. By the time I stepped back outside, Glenda and her crew had started measuring the distance from my porch to the tree line. "You've got about 2 hours before you're all trespassing," I said. She tried to laugh it off. "You can't stop a community decision." "You're not a community. You're a power-hungry HOA with a fake vote and no legal authority here." She waved her clipboard. "We'll see what the sheriff says," I smiled. "Funny, I work with him. You'll be seeing him real soon." By 11:30, the gravel road leading to my property was lined with 2 county trucks, one unmarked sheriff's vehicle, and a rusted red hatchback that belonged to Nalan, who had apparently dropped everything the moment he heard the word annexation. I stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed, watching the supposed HOA volunteers scramble to look busy. Glenda still hadn't left. Now she was pacing in front of a pine tree, tapping her pen against her clipboard like she was orchestrating a military operation. The pink pantsuit had picked up a streak of dirt on the hem, and that alone made the morning feel like a win. Nalan jogged up the steps 2 at a time, his boots leaving dusty prints on the boards. "Got your message," he said, flipping open a worn leather folder. "Pulled everything we've got on Whispering Pines. There's no record of a boundary expansion. Not through zoning, not through the county register, not through planning, nothing." I motioned toward Glenda. "They filed fake documents, claimed they held a vote, said the land was under their control." He raised an eyebrow. "Did they now?" I nodded. "And they brought a backhoe." He looked past me toward the far end of the clearing, where a contractor in a high-vis vest leaned against the massive yellow machine, chewing sunflower seeds like this was just another Tuesday. "Contractor's name?" Nalan asked. I handed him a picture I'd taken of the side of the machine earlier. Rigsby Earth and Stone. I'll call the state licensing board, he said, already dialing. If they didn't check jurisdiction before rolling in, that's gonna cost them. I turned my attention to the woman herself, who was now planting flags along the tree line with one of her clipboard lackeys. Glenda, I called. She turned sharply, trying to mask the twitch in her jaw. You're interfering with a legal removal. You'll want to speak to my friend first. I gestured toward Nalan, who was already making his way toward her. I'm with county zoning, he said, flipping out his badge. We need to have a chat about the documents you submitted. I've already spoken to the planning board, she said quickly. No, you haven't, he replied. I just got off the phone with them. They've never received a petition, an application, or a single piece of paperwork with your name on it. It must have been lost in processing. You submitted fake minutes, he said, and you forged a notary seal. That's not a clerical error. That's criminal. Her lips tightened, but she kept her tone sweet. I think you're confused. We were told this was a simple process. The roads were redistricted last year, and our board interpreted that to mean you interpreted. Nalan cut her off. You don't have the authority to redraw property lines. That's not interpretation, that's fraud. The sheriff's deputy chose that moment to step forward. He'd been leaning against his vehicle, arms folded, watching the exchange with the patience of a man who knew someone was about to hang themselves with their own rope. Ma'am, he said, I need you to hand over any documents you've brought with you today. She hesitated, eyes bouncing between the deputy and her clipboard. I'm not sure that's necessary. It is, he said. And if you refuse, I'll be forced to consider you in willful obstruction of a county zoning investigation. She handed over the clipboard. The deputy flipped through the pages, then held one up to the sunlight. This signature here. Who is Douglas W.? Kinnard, our notary. There's no notary registered in the state under that name, he said. And this seal doesn't exist in the state database. Everything on these forms is fabricated. Glenda's mouth opened, then closed. Her team had stopped flagging trees and were now slowly backing away toward the road. Deputy, Nalan said, you'll want to secure the equipment too. If they start demolition, they're liable for destruction of private property, and that contractor's license could get pulled. The deputy nodded. Already radioed it in. Tow trucks on the way. I stepped off the porch and walked right up to Glenda. You came here thinking I'd panic, I said. You thought you'd steamroll me with a few fake papers and a bright vest, but you picked the wrong address. She didn't respond. Her gaze was locked on the clipboard as if she could will it into legitimacy. You're going to be facing charges, Nalan added. Forgery, attempted fraud, trespassing, possibly conspiracy. I'd get a lawyer. This was supposed to be simple, she said finally, voice low now. We needed the land for the new trail extension. The board already spent money on the landscape design. You spent HOA funds on a project that wasn't legally approved, Nalan asked. You'd better hope your board has liability insurance, because your homeowners are going to be furious when they find out why their dues just vanished. She stared at him, pale now. I was told this would be taken care of, that no one would fight it. Take a guess who told her that, I muttered. Nalan nodded. Wouldn't be the first time a developer whispered in the right ear, I'll run her board's financials. If there's a payment trail, we'll find it. The contractor, sensing the shift in momentum, pulled himself up onto his backhoe and shut it down. Then he climbed down and walked slowly over to us. Look, he said, I was hired for dirt work. I didn't know this was a contested site. I've got a signed work order and a check deposit. You got a problem, take it up with the HOA. Which you'll be refunding, Nalan said flatly. Unless you want your license tied up in a fraud investigation. The guy winced. Fine, I'll walk away. He turned and motioned for his assistant to pack up the gear. By noon, Glenda was sitting in the back of the sheriff's vehicle, her phone confiscated and her clipboard bagged as evidence. Her volunteers had vanished without a word, leaving behind a scatter of flags and a crumpled flyer advertising a community beautification initiative. The tow truck was backing up to the backhoe when Nolan joined me on the porch again. "You really built all this yourself?" he asked, looking up at the roofline. "Every inch," he nodded slowly. "They thought they'd catch you off guard. They caught me on my day off." We both stood in silence a moment, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Then Nolan pulled out his phone again. "I'm going to file an injunction," he said. "Prevent the HOA from initiating any further action on this side of the ridge until we finish the investigation. County's going to want a formal hearing." I nodded. "I'll be there." He looked at me sideways. "You ever think about running for the board? Might be time the community had someone who actually reads the law." I laughed for the first time that day. "Let's just get through this first, then I'll think about politics," he grinned. "Fair enough." The deputy walked over, holding a folded stack of paperwork. "You're clear for now. We've got enough to bring charges, but you'll want to keep an eye out if she's working with a developer. This isn't over." "I built this place to last," I said. "They'll have to do better than fake paperwork." He nodded and turned back toward his vehicle. Nolan followed, already on the phone with the county auditor's office. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and looked out through the window at the clearing, the same clearing I'd stood in a decade ago, when this was nothing but trees and stubborn dirt. They tried to take it in a day. They didn't realize I was carved from the same wood as this place. And I don't bend. 2 days after Glenda was driven off the property in the back of a sheriff's cruiser, I got a call from the county prosecutor's office. They wanted a statement, not just about the forged documents or the attempt to bulldoze my place, but something bigger. Something they'd uncovered after Nolan handed over the HOA's financial records and board meeting logs. I drove down to the courthouse with a binder under one arm and a flash drive in my inside jacket pocket. 5 minutes into the interview, Assistant District Attorney Carla Mendez leaned back in her chair and exhaled like she just opened a rotten fridge. "You know how many fake invoices are buried in here?" she asked, flipping through the spreadsheet Nolan had compiled. "They've been funneling HOA dues into personal accounts, shell landscaping companies, overpriced consulting fees, even a children's park that doesn't exist." I leaned forward. "What's the total?" "Just under $320,000 over the last 4 years. She tapped the edge of the folder. "And that's just what we found in the first pass." I nodded. "What about the trail extension Glenda mentioned?" She initiated a purchase agreement with a private developer. Whispering Pines was planning to sell off 5 parcels of undeveloped land. Some of it isn't even zoned for construction. "Your property wasn't on the original list." She tried to loop me in after the fact. "Exactly. She needed that land to meet the developer's minimum acreage requirement. Without it, the whole deal falls apart." I sat back. "So this wasn't about aesthetics or zoning. It was about sealing a real estate deal." Carla closed the file. "And it looks like she wasn't acting alone." I looked up. "Other board members," she nodded. 3 of them, including the treasurer. We have documented communications between them and the development firm. Meetings at restaurants, wire transfers, promises of kickbacks if the deal went through. "And the homeowners? Completely in the dark," she said. "They've been paying dues for community maintenance that never happened. No audit, no transparency, and no one thought to question it. Until now." We finished the interview, and I handed over the flash drive with the video footage from my security cameras. It showed the measuring crew trespassing, Glenda handing out documents, and the contractor prepping the backhoe. Carla thanked me, then said she'd be requesting a preliminary injunction to freeze all Whispering Pines accounts. When I got back home, the air was different. Not just quieter, more aware, like the trees were listening. I found myself walking the perimeter of the land, making sure nothing had been disturbed. Everything was where it should be. No flags, no markings. Just pine needles crunching under my boots and the occasional squirrel watching me like I owed it rent. Later that evening, I got a knock at the door. It was a man in his late 50s, wearing a faded blue ball cap and a work jacket that had seen more than a few winters. He introduced himself as Ray Connolly, a resident of Whispering Pines since the development first opened in the early 90s. "I heard what happened," he said. "Everyone's talking. HOA sent out a letter claiming there was a misunderstanding and that Glenda's taking a leave of absence." "She's taking a plea deal," I said. Ray's eyebrows shot up. "That explains the panic." He glanced around the property, eyes lingering on the cabin's stonework. "You built this yourself, every piece," he nodded, as if that answered a question he hadn't said out loud. "We've been getting letters for years. Arbitrary fines, threats about fences, paint colors. Once they tried to charge my wife $200 for hanging a wind chime too close to the front sidewalk." I raised an eyebrow and he chuckled bitterly. "No joke, but nobody fought back. Most of us just paid it to avoid the hassle. Until now." He looked at me, something steady behind his gaze. "We're holding a community meeting this Saturday, not their kind of meeting, a real one. You should come." "I'm not a member. Doesn't matter." "You're the reason we're waking up." I agreed to attend, and he left with a firm handshake that told me he'd spent years working with his hands and never once apologized for it. Saturday came fast. I arrived at the old VFW hall just past 6. The parking lot was full pickup trucks, minivans, a couple motorcycles. Inside, the place buzzed with low conversation, folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder. Someone had set up a projector, and a hand-painted sign read, "Whispering Pines Homeowners for Accountability." Ray waved me over to the front row. He stood up and addressed the room, his voice carrying with the quiet authority of someone who'd only speak once. "Most of you know why we're here. You've seen the letters, the fines, the threats. Some of you have paid for repairs on property you didn't damage. Some of you lost money when the HOA denied permits for improvements, then approved the same changes for their friends." He paused, letting that sink in. "But this week, the whole operation came crashing down because one man refused to be bullied." He turned to me. "Elijah, would you come up here?" I wasn't one for speeches, but I stood anyway. The room quieted. "I didn't plan to get involved," I said. "I just wanted to protect what I built." But when I saw how far they were willing to go, how many rules they were willing to break, I realized it wasn't just about my cabin. I looked out over the crowd, young couples, retirees, single parents' faces worn by years of quiet resentment. They used fear. They used confusion. They counted on you staying silent. A woman in the third row stood up. "I was fined $400 for my mailbox being too rustic. They said it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic." Another voice called out. "They shut down our community garden. Said it was attracting bees." Laughter rippled through the crowd, bitter but united. Ray stepped up beside me. "We're starting a petition to dissolve the current board and appoint a transitional committee. We're also requesting a forensic audit of all HOA spending from the last 5 years." Cheers erupted, louder than I expected. A man in the back raised his hand. "What about the land deal?" "The developer," I answered. "The county's stepping in, the contract's being voided. Glenda and 3 board members are facing felony charges. The accounts are frozen. No more backroom deals." Someone shouted, "About time." That night, I stayed long after the chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed. People came up one by one, shaking my hand, telling their stories. A nurse who was threatened with foreclosure after missing one payment. A teacher fined for planting native wildflowers. A veteran who'd been warned about flying his service flag too high. When I finally left, the parking lot was nearly empty. The air was cool, and for the first time in a long while it felt like something had shifted. Not just in the neighborhood, but in the people. At home, I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, staring out at the dark outline of the trees. My phone buzzed an email from the county clerk. They'd approved a motion to strip Whispering Pines HOA of its charter pending the investigation. A court-appointed administrator would oversee the transition. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair. They thought they could take it all in one day. They didn't know I'd spent 10 years building more than just a cabin. I'd built a line no one crosses. And now, the whole damn town knew where it stood. The county's administrative freeze on the Whispering Pines HOA went into effect 3 days after the community meeting. By the following Monday, a court-appointed forensic auditor named Rachel DeWitt was sitting at a folding table inside the Whispering Pines clubhouse with a laptop, 2 boxes of receipts, and zero sympathy for the mess she was digging through. She called me personally after she uncovered what she called a pattern of intentional concealment. According to her, the HOA hadn't just been mismanaging funds, they'd been laundering them. A separate LLC, registered under the name Pinewell Consulting, had been used for years to funnel inflated service contracts and fake maintenance orders. The kicker: that LLC was registered to the treasurer's brother-in-law, who lived 2 states away and had never once visited the property. I met Rachel in the clubhouse that afternoon. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and moved with the no-nonsense energy of someone who'd spent her life untangling financial disasters. The clubhouse looked nothing like the pristine community center the HOA's newsletters had described. The carpet was stained, the ceiling tiles warped from old water damage, and the so-called fitness area was just a broken treadmill and a weight bench with no weights. They inflated the budget for this building by nearly $40,000, she said, tapping her screen. But no licensed contractors pulled permits for any renovations. I traced the payments to Pinewell, and Pinewell sent the money straight to a personal account under Glenda's name. Direct deposit, I asked. She nodded. Weekly transfers, small enough to avoid suspicion, but over time it added up. $112,000 just from this facility alone. That doesn't include trail maintenance, landscaping, or the so-called neighborhood security program. I leaned against the wall and let that settle. What security program? Rachel turned her screen toward me. They billed residents for monthly patrols. According to their records, they were paying a contractor named Summit Watch Services, but the address on file, it's a P.O. box in a strip mall next to a vape shop. I rubbed my jaw, processing it all. How do you want to handle this? I've already submitted a report to the county prosecutor. They're drafting a criminal complaint. There's enough here to go after Glenda, the treasurer, and 2 additional board members for wire fraud, conspiracy, and criminal misappropriation of funds. Possibly even RICO charges if we can prove the LLC was part of a broader scheme. I looked around the clubhouse again. You think they pulled this off without help? Rachel hesitated. That's the part I wanted to tell you in person. We found email exchanges tied to a private Gmail account. Password-protected PDFs. Invoices marked confidential developer coordination. The attachments indicate a relationship with a regional property firm, Crestwood Development Group. They've been quietly buying land around the perimeter of Whispering Pines for the past 18 months, trying to build a new subdivision or expand an existing one. Either way, Glenda promised them your parcel as the final piece. The emails make it clear. If the HOA couldn't get voluntary compliance, they'd fabricate a code enforcement process, declare the property in violation, and initiate removal under the guise of community improvement. That's why they brought the backhoe. They never expected anyone to challenge the paperwork. I took a long breath. And now we let the legal system do what it's supposed to, but we're going to need statements, not just yours, residents, too. The more, the better. I left the clubhouse with a flash drive and a court summons in my glove compartment. Over the next week, I helped coordinate statements from 15 homeowners. Each had a different story, but the pattern was the same. Surprise fees, vague citations, and the constant implication that compliance was the only way to avoid trouble. One couple had been forced to replace their entire driveway after a letter claimed it was non-standard, only to discover later that the board president had used the same contractor and received a private rebate. The hearing started 2 weeks later in the county courthouse. The HOA's legal team tried to delay proceedings, citing procedural confusion and incomplete documentation. The judge, a wiry man named Justice Halst with a permanent frown etched into his forehead, wasn't having it. "The court finds no confusion here," he said during the preliminary hearing. "What I see is a string of deliberate and coordinated actions designed to deceive homeowners and defraud a community. Motion for delay denied." Glenda was present but didn't speak. Her attorney did all the talking, most of it desperate. The treasurer, a wiry man named Curtis Ellison, kept his head down. The others didn't even show. Bench warrants were issued before lunch. By the second day of testimony, the courtroom was packed. Residents filled the benches, some standing along the walls. Even the local newspaper sent a reporter. I testified just before noon, laid out the timeline, the forged annexation papers, the illegal equipment on my land. I presented the photos, the video, the documents Nalan and I had collected. The judge listened without interruption. When I stepped down, a woman in the front row, Mrs. Callahan, who'd lived in the neighborhood since the early 90s, stood up with her cane and said, "About time someone did something." The judge didn't reprimand her. On the final day of the hearing, the prosecutor introduced the forensic audit's full findings. Over $350,000 misappropriated. Multiple shell companies. Emails confirming intent to deceive. And a signed memorandum of understanding between Glenda and Crestwood Development Group, promising the HOA president a consulting position in the firm post-sale. The courtroom went still when that was read aloud. The verdict came quickly, guilty on all counts. The court ordered full restitution, frozen assets, and the dissolution of the Whispering Pines HOA charter. The judge also issued a permanent injunction. No HOA would be allowed to form over the Whispering Pines development for a minimum of 25 years without unanimous resident approval and a public oversight committee. Glenda was escorted out in cuffs. Curtis followed. The developer's lawyers filed an emergency appeal, but the land deal was dead. My cabin stayed exactly where it was, untouched, unclaimed, and now part of a protected parcel under county oversight, thanks to a new zoning ordinance I helped draft. A month later, I was back on my porch sanding the new railing I'd installed. A red truck pulled up, and Ray Connolly stepped out with a stack of printouts in his hand. "You here?" he said, handing me the papers. It was a flyer. Whispering Pines Community Association reformation vote. He grinned. "We're doing it right this time. Volunteer board only, no dues without receipts, and every decision gets voted on by everyone." I looked it over, nodding. "You've got the signatures, more than enough. County oversight's already signed off. We're holding the vote next weekend." "You coming?" "I'll be there." He looked around at the land, the trees, the cabin. "You know, you didn't just stop them. You reminded us we don't have to be afraid of the people who claim they know better." I shrugged. "Sometimes all it takes is someone saying no loud enough." He left, and I got back to work. The sun was setting, streaking orange through the trees. I could hear kids laughing down the road, neighbors chatting across driveways. The place felt different now. Calmer. Like the land had taken a breath it didn't know it had been holding. I didn't build this cabin to make a point. But I guess sometimes when you build something strong enough, it becomes one. And no matter how many papers they forge, how many flags they plant, or how big their backhoe is, some things just don't move.